I never thought refusing to hand over a gallon of antifreeze would land me in the middle of a legal battle with my HOA. But here we are, sitting in a courtroom while a middle-aged woman named Patricia explains to a judge why she deserves compensation for a frozen van engine. Let me back up and explain how this whole mess started, because trust me, it's worth hearing from the beginning. My name is Gregory Thompson, and I moved into the Riverside Meadows community in Boise, Idaho, about 8 months ago. The place looked perfect when I first toured it. Nice 2-story houses with neat lawns, a community center, walking trails near the Boise River, and reasonable HOA fees of about $200 a month. I'm a software engineer who works remotely, so I figured a quiet suburban neighborhood would be ideal for focusing on my projects while enjoying some peace and quiet. The first few months were actually pretty great. My neighbors were friendly enough. I got my home office set up exactly how I wanted it, and I even started using the community gym a few times a week. The HOA seemed relatively hands-off, which was exactly what I wanted. I dealt with nightmare HOAs at my previous places, so I knew what red flags to look for. Riverside Meadows seemed different, seemed being the key word. Everything changed when Patricia Hendricks took over as HOA president in October. Patricia was one of those people who clearly had too much time on their hands and decided that micromanaging an entire neighborhood was the perfect hobby. She was probably in her mid-50s, always wore these pastel-colored blazers, and had that particular haircut that somehow every HOA president seems to have. You know the one. Within her first week, she sent out a 12-page memo about community standards and expectations that included gems like mandatory seasonal door wreath guidelines and specifications about what shade of beige was acceptable for mailbox posts. I mostly ignored the memo. I kept my lawn maintained, didn't park any junker cars in my driveway, and figured that was enough. But Patricia apparently had other ideas about what constituted good community citizenship. The first real interaction I had with her was in mid-November. I was in my garage working on my truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 that I'd bought used but kept in great condition. I heard heels clicking on my driveway and looked up to see Patricia marching toward me with a clipboard. Already a bad sign. "Mr. Thompson," she said, not even bothering with a hello. "I need to discuss your vehicle situation." I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. "What about it?" "Your truck has been parked in your driveway for 3 consecutive days. According to HOA guidelines, all vehicles must be garaged overnight unless special permission is granted." I glanced at my truck, then back at her. "It's my driveway, on my property." "Your property is part of this community, which means it falls under our covenant, codes, and restrictions. Visible vehicles decrease property values and create visual clutter." She said this like she was reciting from a manual, which she probably was. "Patricia, with all due respect, pretty much everyone on this street parks cars in their driveway. Which is exactly why I'm speaking to everyone about compliance. I'm starting with you because you're one of the more recent residents, and I believe in setting clear expectations early." She tapped her pen against her clipboard. "I'll need you to garage the vehicle by tonight, or I'll have to issue a violation notice." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that antagonizing the HOA president right off the bat probably wasn't smart. "Fine, I'll park it in the garage tonight." "Excellent. I'm glad we could resolve this quickly." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. The HOA is organizing a community antifreeze drive for our shared vehicles. We'll need all residents to contribute at least 1 gallon by the end of the month." "Antifreeze drive?" I asked. "Yes. The HOA maintains several vehicles, including our community van, a lawn maintenance truck, and a utility vehicle. We use them for neighborhood maintenance, events, and transportation for elderly residents. Winter is coming, and we need to ensure all the vehicles are properly winterized. We're asking each household to contribute antifreeze to our community supply. Why doesn't the HOA just buy antifreeze? That's what the monthly fees are for, right? Patricia's smile tightened. We prefer a community involvement approach. It builds neighborhood spirit. Plus, bulk purchasing by individual households is more cost-effective than having the HOA purchase it from commercial suppliers. That made absolutely no sense, but I was tired and wanted to get back to my truck. I'll think about it. The deadline is November 30th. I'll send you a reminder. And with that, she clicked away on her heels. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia's presence became increasingly unavoidable. She sent daily emails about various community initiatives, most of which seemed designed to extract either money or time from residents. There was a mandatory community cleanup day, a holiday decoration contest with specific rules about light colors and placement, and of course, constant reminders about the antifreeze drive. I ignored most of it. I had a major project deadline at work, and frankly, I had better things to do than worry about whether my Christmas lights were the approved shade of white. The antifreeze thing particularly annoyed me. I did some quick math and realized Patricia was essentially trying to get residents to donate about $300 worth of antifreeze under the guise of community spirit. Meanwhile, our HOA fees theoretically covered vehicle maintenance. On November 28th, Patricia showed up at my door at 8 in the morning on a Saturday. I answered in my pajamas, coffee mug in hand, not particularly thrilled to have company. "Mr. Thompson, I haven't received your antifreeze contribution yet. The deadline is in 2 days." "Yeah, I'm not participating in that," I said, her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. I pay HOA fees every month. Vehicle maintenance is supposed to be covered by those fees. I'm not donating antifreeze on top of what I already pay. This is a community initiative, Mr. Thompson. Everyone is participating. Then I guess I'm the exception." Patricia's face was starting to turn red. "The HOA board voted on this initiative. Participation isn't optional. Show me where in the CC and Articus it says I have to donate antifreeze," I said. "I read through the entire covenant when I bought this place. There's nothing about mandatory donations of automotive supplies. This falls under Community Participation Requirements, Section 8, Subsection C. That section is about maintaining your own property and attending mandatory meetings. It doesn't say anything about donating supplies to the HOA." I'd actually looked this up after her first mention of the antifreeze drive, specifically because it seemed like the kind of thing that would lead to problems. Patricia drew herself up to her full height. "If you refuse to participate in community initiatives, there will be consequences." "What consequences? You going to fine me for not giving you free antifreeze? I'll be bringing this to the board. We'll see what they have to say about your lack of community spirit." She turned and marched off my porch. I closed the door and went back to my coffee, figuring that was the end of it. I was wrong. On December 1st, I got a formal notice in my mailbox. It was a violation letter stating that I had failed to comply with a community initiative and was being fined $50. I immediately drafted an email to the HOA board, citing the specific sections of the CC and Articus, and explaining why the fine was invalid. I also pointed out that the antifreeze drive hadn't been properly voted on by the community, only by the board, which meant it didn't qualify as a binding initiative. The response I got was from Patricia directly. She claimed the board had full authority to implement community programs, and that my refusal to participate demonstrated a pattern of non-compliance. She referenced my truck parking situation from November as evidence. Never mind that I'd complied with that request immediately. I decided to pay the $50 fine rather than fight it, but I also started documenting everything. Every email, every notice, every interaction. I had a feeling this wasn't over. December in Boise can be brutal. Temperatures were already dropping into the teens at night, and weather forecasts were predicting a particularly nasty cold snap in mid-December. I made sure my own vehicles were winterized, checked my home's heating system, and stocked up on supplies in case we got snowed in. On December 10th, Patricia sent out a community-wide email announcing that the Antifreeze drive had been a success, with all but one household participating. She didn't name me specifically, but the pointed language made it pretty clear who she was talking about. The email went on to say that thanks to the generous donations, all HOA vehicles were being winterized and would be ready for winter operations. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured Patricia was just being petty, and as long as I kept following the actual rules in the CC and Arctic S, she couldn't do much to me. On December 14th, everything changed. The cold snap hit hard and fast. The temperature dropped from a relatively mild 35 degrees during the day to -5 overnight. It was the kind of cold that makes your nose hairs freeze when you breathe in, the kind that causes car batteries to die and pipes to burst if you're not careful. I woke up that morning to my phone buzzing with messages from the neighborhood group chat. Apparently, there was some kind of emergency with the community van. I scrolled through the messages, trying to figure out what was going on. The van, which the HOA used to transport elderly residents to medical appointments and grocery stores, wouldn't start. Several residents were stranded, including old Mrs. Chen, who had a doctor's appointment that morning. People were trying to figure out solutions, offering rides and generally trying to help out. Then Patricia chimed in. The van's engine block has cracked. It appears the antifreeze mixture was insufficient for these temperatures. This is going to cost thousands to repair. Someone asked how that was possible if everyone had donated antifreeze. There was a long pause in the chat before Patricia responded. We had sufficient donations to winterize all our vehicles except the community van. One household refused to participate, leaving us short of what we needed. I won't name names, but their selfishness has now resulted in significant damage to community property. My phone started buzzing with private messages. Some people were sympathetic, knowing Patricia's reputation for drama. Others were angry, buying into her narrative that I was somehow responsible for the van's problems. I read through her message again, feeling my blood pressure rise. The implication was clear. She was blaming me for the van's engine damage because I hadn't donated antifreeze. But the math didn't add up. If everyone else had supposedly donated, there should have been more than enough antifreeze. A gallon or two wouldn't make the difference between a properly winterized vehicle and a cracked engine block. I grabbed my jacket and headed to the HOA office, which was located in the community center. I found Patricia there, surrounded by several board members, all looking stressed. "We need to talk," I said. Patricia looked up, and her expression immediately hardened. "Mr. Thompson, I suppose you've heard about the disaster you've caused." "I didn't cause anything. You want to explain how 1 gallon of antifreeze would have prevented this. If you had participated like everyone else, we would have had sufficient supplies. Instead, we had to make difficult decisions about which vehicles to prioritize, and the van suffered as a result." "That's not how winterizing vehicles works," I said. Each vehicle needs a specific antifreeze mixture regardless of what other vehicles you're treating. If you didn't have enough antifreeze for the van, that's a failure of planning, not because I didn't donate a gallon. One of the board members, a guy named Robert Martinez who I'd met at a few community events, spoke up. Patricia, he has a point. The van should have been winterized properly regardless. We had to stretch our resources, Patricia snapped. And we came up short because Mr. Thompson here decided his principles were more important than community welfare. No, I said, keeping my voice level. You came up short because you tried to get residents to cover costs that should have been covered by HOA fees. That's mismanagement, not my fault. The van repairs are going to cost at least $5,000, Patricia said. The board is voting to levy a special assessment to cover the costs. Your share will be $250. Absolutely not. I'm not paying for repairs that resulted from your failure to properly maintain HOA property. Then we'll place a lien on your property. You agreed to the CC and RTCS when you purchased your home, Mr. Thompson. That includes financial responsibility for community property. It includes reasonable assessments for maintenance and repairs, I shot back. Not assessments to cover costs that resulted from negligence. If you try to place a lien on my property, I'll fight it. Patricia stood up, gathering her papers. Do what you feel you need to do, Mr. Thompson. The board will be voting on the assessment at our meeting tomorrow night. I suggest you attend if you want your voice heard. I left the community center furious, but trying to keep my head clear. Something about Patricia's story didn't add up, and I needed to figure out what really happened. I spent the rest of the day doing research. I called a few mechanics in the area and described the situation. They all said the same thing. If a vehicle's engine block cracked due to freezing, it meant there was essentially no antifreeze in the system. A slightly insufficient mixture might cause some coolant issues, but a cracked engine block meant someone had either not added any antifreeze at all or had severely diluted what was there. I also looked up Idaho HOA law. Turns out, HOAs can levy special assessments, but there are specific requirements. The assessment has to be for necessary repairs or improvements. It has to be approved by a majority of the board, and in some cases, it requires a vote of the homeowners depending on the amount. More importantly, homeowners can challenge assessments they believe are unjust or result from HOA mismanagement. Armed with this information, I showed up at the board meeting the next night. The community center's meeting room was packed. Apparently, a lot of residents were concerned about the special assessment, and several of the elderly residents who relied on the van were there to express their frustration about the situation. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about the van situation. She had photos of the damaged engine, quotes from mechanics, and a detailed breakdown of the repair costs. Then she presented her proposed special assessment, $250 per household. Before we vote, I said, standing up, I have some questions. Patricia looked annoyed. The floor is not open for questions yet, Mr. Thompson. I'm a homeowner in this community and this assessment directly affects me. I have a right to ask questions before you vote. Robert, who was apparently more reasonable than Patricia, nodded. Let him speak. Thank you, I said. My first question is, how often was the van maintained? Specifically, when was it last serviced before the cold snap? Patricia shuffled through her papers. The van received regular maintenance. That's not an answer. When was it last serviced? I don't have the exact date in front of me. Convenient. Second question. You said you didn't have enough antifreeze to properly winterize the van. How much antifreeze was actually in the van system when the engine cracked? I'm not a mechanic, Mr. Thompson. I don't have those technical details, but you have mechanic quotes here. Surely they indicated what the problem was. Patricia's face was getting red again. The engine block cracked due to freezing. That's what the mechanics told us. Which means there was essentially no antifreeze in the system, I said. Not just an insufficient amount, none. A properly mixed antifreeze solution protects engines down to -34 degrees or lower. We hit -5. If the engine cracked, someone either never added antifreeze at all or drained the system. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd. Other residents were clearly doing the same math I had done. "Are you accusing me of something?" Patricia demanded. "I'm saying that your explanation doesn't make sense. You claimed that everyone except me donated antifreeze. According to the email you sent out, you collected donations from 73 households. At 1 gallon per household, that's 73 gallons of antifreeze. Even if you were winterizing multiple vehicles, that's more than enough. A typical vehicle cooling system holds about 4 to 5 gallons of fluid, split between water and antifreeze. You should have had plenty." Robert was frowning now. "Patricia, where is the antifreeze that was donated? We should still have a significant supply." "It was used for the other vehicles and for refills throughout the season." "In 2 weeks?" I asked. "You collected all that antifreeze at the end of November. It's only mid-December. Where did it all go?" "This is ridiculous," Patricia said. "I don't have to justify our maintenance procedures to you." "Actually, you do," said Robert. "If we're levying a special assessment because of vehicle damage, we need to understand how that damage occurred. Patricia, I'm going to table the vote on the assessment until we can get more information." "Robert, we need these funds now. The van needs to be repaired." "And it will be. But we're not voting on a $250 per household assessment without more information." Meeting adjourned. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but several other board members were nodding in agreement with Robert. The meeting broke up with residents clustering in groups, talking in low voices. I went home feeling like I'd won a small victory, but I knew this wasn't over. Patricia had too much invested in her narrative to let it go easily. Over the next few days, I did some more digging. I talked to neighbors, asked questions, and started piecing together a timeline. What I discovered was interesting. Several residents mentioned that they'd never actually seen anyone winterizing the HOA vehicles. Patricia had sent out an email in early December saying the work was done, but nobody had witnessed it happening. The vehicles were kept in a locked storage garage behind the community center, so access was limited to board members. I also learned that Patricia had been pushing for the HOA to purchase new vehicles for months. She'd brought it up at several board meetings, arguing that the current vehicles were old and unreliable. The board had rejected the proposals because the vehicles, while older, were in decent condition and still had years of life left in them. An idea was forming in my mind, but it was pretty dark. I didn't want to believe that Patricia would intentionally sabotage HOA property just to prove a point or push her agenda. But the more I learned, the more suspicious the whole situation seemed. I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, separate from Patricia. In it, I outlined all my concerns about the van situation, the suspicious timeline, and the lack of transparency about where the donated antifreeze had gone. I also requested a full accounting of HOA maintenance records for the past year. 2 days later, I got a response from Robert. He wanted to meet with me privately. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Boise, away from the neighborhood. "I've been on this board for 3 years," Robert said once we'd gotten our drinks, And I've never seen Patricia act the way she's been acting since she became president. Something is off. What do you mean? She's been pushing these weird initiatives that don't make sense. The antifreeze drive was strange from the start. We have a maintenance budget. There was no reason to ask residents to donate supplies. When I questioned it, she said it was about building community involvement, but it felt wrong. Did you vote for the initiative? The board approved it, but honestly, Patricia pushed it through quickly. She framed it as a minor thing, just asking residents to contribute to a supply drive. None of us realized she was planning to use it as the sole source of antifreeze for the vehicles. So what actually happened with the winterization? Robert sighed. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I went to the storage garage yesterday and looked at the other HOA vehicles. The maintenance truck and utility vehicle both seem fine. They start up no issues. Which makes me wonder why the van was different. Can you access the maintenance records? That's the problem. Patricia has been handling all the maintenance scheduling herself. She says it's more efficient than having the whole board involved, but it means she's the only one with detailed records. That's a conflict of interest. I know. I'm bringing it up at the next board meeting. But Gregory, I need to ask you something. Are you willing to push this further? Because if we really investigate what happened, and if Patricia did something wrong, this is going to get ugly. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to just let it go, pay whatever fine or assessment they wanted and move on with my life. But another part of me was angry. Patricia had blamed me publicly for something that wasn't my fault, had tried to manipulate residents into covering costs they shouldn't have to cover, and was potentially mismanaging HOA funds and property. I'm willing to push it, I said. What do you need from me? Keep documenting everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every email, every notice. If this goes legal, we'll need a paper trail. Over the next week, things got tense. Patricia sent out another email to the community, reiterating that the van repairs were urgent and that the special assessment was necessary. She again implied that one resident's lack of cooperation had caused the problem, which led to more angry messages directed at me. I responded with my own email to the community, carefully laying out the facts as I understood them. I explained that a cracked engine block meant there was essentially no antifreeze in the system, not just 1 gallon short. I pointed out that if everyone else had donated as claimed, there should have been plenty of antifreeze. And I raised questions about why there was no transparency about HOA maintenance procedures. Some residents appreciated my email. Others thought I was causing unnecessary drama. A few sent me private messages of support, saying they'd also had problems with Patricia's management style, but had been afraid to speak up. The situation came to a head on December 22nd. I got home from a grocery run to find a notice taped to my door. It was from Patricia, informing me that the board had voted to approve the special assessment and that my payment of $250 was due by January 15th. Failure to pay would result in a lien on my property. I immediately called Robert. Did the board actually vote on this? No, he said, sounding angry. We're having an emergency meeting tonight. Patricia sent that notice without authorization. Can you come? I was there at 7 sharp. The meeting was heated from the start. Patricia tried to claim she had the authority as president to approve emergency assessments, but Robert and 2 other board members shut her down. They pointed out that the bylaws required a full board vote for any assessment over $100 per household. This is ridiculous, Patricia said. We're wasting time arguing about procedures while the van sits broken. All because Gregory Thompson decided his money was more important than community needs. This isn't about Gregory, said Robert. This is about proper management. Patricia, I'm making a formal motion that we hire an independent auditor to review HOA finances and maintenance records for the past 6 months. Patricia's face went pale. That's completely unnecessary. I disagree. We have irregularities in how this situation was handled and we need transparency. All in favor. 4 of the 6 board members raised their hands. Patricia and her ally, a woman named Susan, voted against. Motion passes, Robert said. Patricia, we'll need you to provide all financial records and maintenance documentation by the end of the week. Patricia gathered her things and stormed out of the meeting without another word. The auditor's report came back in mid-January, and it was damning. The HOA had a maintenance budget of $12,000 per year, more than enough to cover regular vehicle maintenance, including winterization. However, Patricia had spent almost $8,000 of that budget in her first 3 months as president, mostly on what she called community improvement projects that the board hadn't fully approved. More importantly, there was no record of antifreeze being purchased or of the vehicles being professionally winterized. The donated antifreeze from residents had been logged into HOA inventory, but there was no record of it being used. When board members went to check the storage area where supplies were kept, they found 47 unopened gallons of antifreeze sitting on shelves. The van, meanwhile, had records showing it hadn't received professional maintenance in over 8 months. The last service had been in April. The auditor's conclusion was clear. The van's engine had cracked because it hadn't been properly winterized, not because of insufficient antifreeze supplies. The donated antifreeze from residents had been collected but never used. Robert called another emergency board meeting. This time, Patricia showed up with a lawyer. My client is resigning as HOA president, effective immediately, the lawyer said before anyone else could speak. She denies any wrongdoing but believes it's in the community's best interest to step down. That's not good enough, I said. I'd been invited to the meeting as the homeowner who'd filed the initial complaint. Patricia blamed me publicly for damages that resulted from her own negligence. She tried to levy an illegal assessment, and she collected donations from residents under false pretenses. I want a formal apology and correction of the record. Patricia's lawyer started to object, but Robert cut him off. Gregory's right. Patricia, you damaged his reputation in this community. At minimum, you owe him an apology. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. Through gritted teeth, she said, I apologize for any inconvenience. Not good enough, I said. I want a written apology sent to every resident in this community, explaining that I was not responsible for the van damage and that the situation resulted from mismanagement. The lawyer whispered something to Patricia. She nodded stiffly. Fine. And the donated antifreeze needs to be returned to residents or properly used for community vehicles, added Robert. You collected it under false pretenses. The antifreeze will be used for its intended purpose, the lawyer said. Is there anything else? Yes, I said. I'm filing a small claims suit for the $50 fine I paid back in December for not participating in the antifreeze drive. That fine was improperly levied. Patricia's lawyer made a note. We'll respond to any lawsuit appropriately. They left, and I felt like I could finally breathe, but there was still the matter of the van repairs. The board voted to pay for the repairs out of the general HOA fund, which meant dipping into reserves but avoiding a special assessment. They also voted to implement new financial controls, requiring board approval for any expenditure over $500 and mandatory monthly financial reports. Robert was elected as the new HOA president. His first act was to send out a community-wide email explaining everything that had happened, including a full account of the van situation and a formal apology to me for the way Patricia had handled things. The response from the community was mixed. Some people were grateful for the transparency. Others were upset that there had been mismanagement. A few seemed to think I'd caused unnecessary trouble by not just going along with things. I didn't care much about public opinion at that point. I'd stood up for what was right, and the truth had come out. The small claims suit against Patricia took a few weeks to process. Her lawyer tried to argue that HOA fines were internal matters and couldn't be challenged in small claims court, but the judge disagreed. Since the fine had been improperly levied without basis in the CC and Articus, it was essentially money taken under false pretenses. Patricia was ordered to repay me the $50 plus court costs. It wasn't about the money at that point. It was about the principle. In February, I learned through neighborhood gossip that Patricia and her husband were putting their house up for sale. Apparently, the stress of the whole situation and the damage to her reputation in the community made staying untenable. I felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt, but mostly, I felt vindicated. Patricia had created this situation through her own actions. If she'd been honest from the start, if she'd properly maintained HOA property, if she hadn't tried to shift blame onto me, none of this would have happened. The van was repaired by early February, costing the HOA just over $5,000 as estimated. Robert made sure to send out detailed reports about the repair process and the steps being taken to prevent similar issues in the future. All HOA vehicles were now on a regular maintenance schedule with a professional service center, and there would be no more community donation drives for basic maintenance supplies. Spring came early to Boise that year. By March, the snow had melted and the neighborhood was starting to look alive again. I was working in my yard one Saturday when Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who'd missed her doctor appointment because of the van breakdown, walked by with her dog. "Mr. Thompson," she called out. "I wanted to thank you," I put down my rake. "For what?" "For standing up to Patricia. A lot of us were afraid to say anything. She was so forceful. But you didn't back down, and because of that we have better leadership now. Robert actually listens to residents. It's been a nice change." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Chen. I hope you're getting to your appointments okay now." "Oh yes. The van is running again and Robert set up a better scheduling system. It's actually more efficient than before." After she left, I stood in my yard for a while, looking at my house and the neighborhood around me. 8 months ago, I'd moved here hoping for peace and quiet. Instead, I'd ended up in a battle with my HOA that had consumed weeks of my life and caused more stress than I'd anticipated. But I'd also learned something important. Sometimes standing up for yourself means fighting battles that seem petty or small. A gallon of antifreeze shouldn't have turned into a legal issue and a community crisis. But Patricia's mismanagement and her attempt to scapegoat me for her failures had forced my hand. I could have just paid the fines, kept my head down, and accepted the narrative that I was the problem. A lot of people would have taken that path because it's easier than fighting. But I decided that my principles mattered more than convenience. The community was better off for it. We had more transparent leadership, better financial controls, and a president who actually cared about doing things right rather than just consolidating power. Over the following months, Robert proved to be an excellent HOA president. He held regular town halls where residents could voice concerns. He created a transparent budget that everyone could access online. He even started a newsletter highlighting positive community stories instead of constant rule enforcement. The antifreeze that had been donated by residents the previous year was finally put to use. Robert organized a community education event where a local mechanic came and taught residents how to winterize their own vehicles. The donated antifreeze was distributed back to residents who wanted it, and the excess was used for the HOA vehicles. I started to actually enjoy living in Riverside Meadows. Without Patricia's constant scrutiny and random initiatives, the neighborhood felt more relaxed. People were friendlier. The HOA became what it should have been all along, an organization that maintained common areas and helped the community function, rather than a power structure for someone's ego trip. In June, I was at the community center using the gym when Robert came in. We'd become friendly over the months, occasionally grabbing coffee or talking about community projects. "Hey Gregory," he said, "I wanted to run something by you. We're looking for new board members." "Interested," I laughed. "After all that drama, you want me on the board?" "Exactly because of all that drama. You're not afraid to ask hard questions and hold people accountable. That's what we need." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no to avoid any more HOA involvement. But another part of me recognized that communities need people who are willing to do the work, ask the tough questions, and stand up for what's right. "Let me think about it," I said. 2 weeks later, I accepted. I figured if I was going to live in a community with an HOA, I might as well help make it function properly. My first board meeting was in July. We discussed boring but necessary things like landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, and upcoming community events. It was everything an HOA board meeting should be, focused on actual community needs rather than power plays and arbitrary rules. During the meeting, Susan, who had been Patricia's ally on the board, announced she was stepping down. She and her family were moving to Oregon for her husband's job. That left another board vacancy. "We need someone organized and detail-oriented," Robert said. "Any suggestions?" I thought about the various neighbors I'd gotten to know. "What about Jennifer Johnson? She lives on Maple Street, coordinates that neighborhood watch program." "She seems really on top of things." Robert nodded. "Good idea. I'll reach out to her." Jennifer joined the board in August. She brought a background in nonprofit management and immediately started improving our documentation systems. Within a month, we had clearer procedures for everything from architectural review requests to common area maintenance. The neighborhood continued to improve through the summer and fall. We organized a community yard sale, a 4th of July barbecue, and a Halloween event for kids. These were the kinds of things Patricia had talked about wanting to do, but she'd been so focused on control and compliance that she'd never actually built the community spirit she claimed to care about. In October, almost a year after Patricia had first demanded my antifreeze donation, I was raking leaves in my front yard when I saw a moving truck pull up to Patricia's old house. A young couple was moving in, probably first-time homebuyers based on their excitement. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Riverside Meadows. I'm Gregory Thompson." The young man shook my hand. "Jake Wilson, this is my wife Amanda. We're so excited to be here. The neighborhood seems great." "It is," I said honestly. "If you have any questions about the HOA or the community, feel free to ask. We've got a good board now and they're actually helpful." "That's good to hear," Amanda said. "We were worried about the HOA, to be honest. We've heard horror stories." "There was some drama last year," I admitted. "But it got resolved. The current leadership is solid. Just keep up with your yard maintenance, follow the reasonable rules, and you'll be fine." We chatted for a few more minutes before they went back to unloading. As I returned to my yard work, I thought about how much had changed in a year. The simple act of refusing to donate antifreeze had spiraled into a community crisis that exposed mismanagement and led to real reform. It was a reminder that small acts of resistance can matter. Standing up to unreasonable demands, asking questions when things don't add up, and refusing to go along with things just because someone in authority says you should. These aren't just abstract principles. They have real consequences for how communities function and how people treat each other. Winter came around again. This time, the HOA vehicles were properly winterized well in advance. Robert sent out an email in November detailing exactly what had been done, which vehicles had been serviced and when. There were no donation drives, no last-minute scrambles, no crisis. When the cold snap hit in late December, colder even than the previous year, all the HOA vehicles started up fine. The community van made its rounds picking up elderly residents for appointments. The maintenance truck cleared snow from the common areas. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. I was at the community center for a board meeting in early January when Mrs. Chen approached me. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted you to know something. My grandson is studying public administration in college." I told him the whole story about what happened last year with Patricia and the van. He's using it as a case study in one of his classes about organizational accountability. Really? I was surprised and a little embarrassed. Really? His professor said it's a perfect example of how small governance structures can go wrong when there's no accountability, and how important it is for people to speak up. My grandson wanted me to thank you for being an example of civic engagement. I didn't quite know what to say to that. I'd never thought of my fight with Patricia as anything grand like civic engagement. I'd just been annoyed that someone was trying to blame me for something that wasn't my fault, but maybe that's what civic engagement really is. Not grand gestures or running for office, but just refusing to accept things that are wrong, even when it's inconvenient or unpopular. The board meeting that night was routine. We approved a new landscaping contract, discussed plans for spring community events, and reviewed the financial reports. Jennifer had created a great dashboard that showed exactly where HOA money was going, making it easy for any resident to see that their fees were being properly managed. After the meeting, Robert and I stood in the parking lot talking. It was cold, but not unbearable. The kind of winter night that feels crisp rather than bitter. "You know what the best part of this past year has been?" Robert said. "What's that?" "The neighborhood actually feels like a community now. When Patricia was in charge, everyone was stressed and suspicious. Now people actually talk to each other, help each other out. We've had fewer complaints, better attendance at events, and people seem happier. That's what happens when leadership focuses on helping instead of controlling," I said. "Exactly." Robert looked at the community center, its windows glowing warm in the dark. "Thanks for not backing down last year. I think a lot of us knew something was wrong, but we didn't know how to address it. You forced the issue, and the community is better for it." I drove home that night thinking about how strange life can be. A year ago, I'd been a guy who just wanted to work from home in peace. Now I was on the HOA board, actively involved in community governance, and apparently some college kid's case study in civic responsibility. All because I refused to hand over a gallon of antifreeze. The following months brought more positive changes to Riverside Meadows. We updated the CC and Articus to clarify what the HOA could and couldn't require from residents. We established clear procedures for levying fines and assessments, with built-in appeal processes. We created term limits for board positions to prevent anyone from consolidating too much power. These weren't dramatic changes, but they mattered. They created a framework where what happened with Patricia couldn't easily happen again. In March, I ran into Susan at a grocery store. She'd moved to Oregon but was back visiting friends. We chatted awkwardly for a few minutes before she said, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not speaking up when Patricia was going after you. I knew she was wrong about the antifreeze thing. I knew the math didn't add up. But she was so confident and forceful, and I just went along with it. That was cowardly of me." "I appreciate you saying that. The thing is, I've thought a lot about it since we moved. About how easy it is to just go along with things, even when you know they're wrong. I'm trying to be better about that." We parted on good terms. Her apology meant more than I would have expected. It was an acknowledgement that the situation hadn't just been about me versus Patricia. It had been about a whole community dynamic where people knew things were wrong, but felt unable or unwilling to speak up. By summer, Riverside Meadows had been transformed. The physical neighborhood looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. People organized in formal gatherings. Kids played in the streets without constant worry about HOA violations. Residents felt comfortable approaching board members with concerns or suggestions. I was working in my garage one Saturday, finally getting around to that truck maintenance I'd started the day Patricia first showed up demanding I park differently. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been about 18 months. My neighbor from across the street, a guy named Tom who I'd become friends with, walked over with a couple of beers. "Thought you might want a break." We sat in my driveway, drinking beer and watching kids ride bikes down the street. "You ever regret it?" Tom asked. "All the drama with Patricia." I thought about it. No, I mean, it was stressful at the time, but look at how things turned out. We have better leadership, better transparency, better everything. If I'd just gone along with her demands, none of that would have happened. True, but you paid a price. People were pretty divided for a while there. Some were, but the people whose opinions I actually care about understood what I was doing. And honestly, even if they hadn't, I couldn't have lived with myself if I just rolled over and let her blame me for something that was her fault. Tom nodded. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad you fought it. Made me think about how I approach things when people in authority make unreasonable demands." That was becoming a common theme in conversations I had with neighbors. The whole situation with Patricia had made people more aware of their rights and more willing to question things that didn't make sense. In September, we held the annual HOA election for board positions. Robert ran for another term as president and won unanimously. I kept my board seat. Jennifer stayed on. We added 2 new members, both thoughtful people who cared about the community. During the first meeting with our new board composition, we reviewed the past year's accomplishments. The list was impressive. Updated governing documents, improved financial transparency, better maintenance procedures, increased community engagement, and 0 major conflicts or complaints. "This is what an HOA should be," Robert said. "Functional, transparent, and actually helpful to residents." Everyone nodded in agreement. As I drove home from that meeting, I reflected on the journey. It had started with such a small thing. 1 gallon of antifreeze. Such a minor request that I could have just complied with, even though it annoyed me. But compliance would have enabled Patricia's behavior. It would have validated her approach to leadership. It would have set a precedent that residents should just go along with whatever the HOA demanded, regardless of whether it made sense or was properly authorized. By refusing, by standing my ground, by demanding accountability, I'd helped create change that benefited everyone in the community. The van that had started all this drama was still running fine. It was properly maintained now, on a regular schedule with a reputable mechanic. The elderly residents who depended on it had reliable transportation. The HOA vehicles served their intended purpose without crisis or conflict. That winter, when the cold came again, I was ready. My vehicles were winterized, my home was secure, and the community was prepared, with properly maintained HOA vehicles and a leadership team that actually did its job. On the coldest night of the year, when the temperature dropped to -15, I looked out my window at the neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Everything was peaceful and secure. My phone buzzed with a message from Robert. All HOA vehicles running perfectly, no issues. Have a good night. I smiled and set my phone down. Sometimes refusing to comply with an unreasonable demand is exactly the right thing to do, even if it causes temporary conflict. Sometimes standing up for principles leads to better outcomes than just going along to get along. A year and a half after Patricia had first demanded I donate antifreeze, Riverside Meadows was a genuinely good place to live. The HOA functioned properly. The community felt like an actual community. And I'd learned that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can lead to the most meaningful change. All because of 1 gallon of antifreeze I refused to give up. It seemed absurd when I thought about it that way, but life is often absurd. What matters is how you respond to the absurdity, whether you stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and whether you're willing to fight for principles that matter. I'd done that, and the community was better for it. That was enough.